The last house on the street. At the end of a quiet, suburban street, there stood a house. It was an old house with peeling paint and boarded-up windows. The locals called it the last house on the street, and they avoided it at all costs. One day, a group of teenagers decided to explore the last house on the street. They had heard the rumors, but they didn't believe them. They thought it would be fun to spend a night in the house and see if anything happened. The teenagers broke into the house and began to explore. They found dusty rooms and cobweb-covered furniture. They also found a strange room in the basement. The room was filled with candles and occult symbols. The teenagers were scared, but they decided to stay. They lit the candles and started to chant. They didn't know what they were doing, but they thought it would be fun to summon a ghost. Suddenly, the candles went out and the room went dark. The teenagers screamed as they heard a voice whispering their names. They tried to run, but the door was locked. The teenagers were trapped in the room with the ghost. The ghost tormented them for hours. It whispered threats in their ears and made strange noises. The teenagers were terrified. Finally, the ghost released the teenagers. They ran out of the house and never looked back. The teenagers never told anyone what happened that night. They were too scared. One day, a new family moved into the neighborhood. They didn't know about the rumors about the last house on the street. They thought it was just a regular house. The family moved into the house and started to settle in. But soon, strange things began to happen. The children heard noises at night and saw shadows in the corners of their rooms. The parents felt uneasy in the house, but they didn't know why. One night, the family was awakened by a loud noise. They ran downstairs to see what had happened. They found the front door open and the furniture overturned. The family was terrified. They knew that something was wrong. They ran out of the house and never looked back. One day, a young man named David decided to move into the last house on the street. He had heard the stories, but he didn't believe them. He thought that the house was just old and creepy, and that the stories were just exaggerated. David was a skeptic. He didn't believe in ghosts or the supernatural. He thought that there was a logical explanation for everything. David moved into the house and started to settle in. At first, everything was fine. But then, strange things began to happen. David would hear footsteps in the hallway when he was alone. He would see shadows in the corners of his rooms. He would wake up in the middle of the night to find his bed empty. David was scared, but he tried to ignore the strange things. He told himself that it was just his imagination, or that the house was just settling. But then, one night, David saw the ghost. David was in bed, trying to sleep. He heard a noise outside his room. He got out of bed and opened the door. David saw the ghost standing in the hallway. It was a terrifying sight. The ghost was pale and gaunt, with empty eyes and a gaping mouth. David screamed and ran back into his room. He locked the door and hid under the covers. David stayed in bed for the rest of the night. He was too scared to come out. The next morning, David decided to leave the house. He knew that he couldn't stay there any longer. David packed his bags and left the last house on the street. He never looked back. David never told anyone what he had seen. He was too scared of what they would think. But he never forgot the ghost. The last house on the street is still empty to this day. The locals say that it is haunted by the ghost of the teenagers who summoned it, the ghost of the ghost hunters who tried to investigate it, and the ghost of David. They say that if you go into the house at night, you will never come out. The conclusion of the story of the last house on the street is a reminder that there are some things in life that are beyond our understanding. It is also a reminder that we should be careful what we wish for. David, The skeptic who moved into the last house on the street learned the hard way that there are some things that we cannot explain. He saw the ghost with his own eyes, and he was never the same again. The last house on the street is a cautionary tale. It is a reminder that there are some places that we should avoid, and some things that we should not mess with. The story also leaves the reader with a sense of mystery. What happened to the teenagers who summoned the ghost? What happened to the ghost hunters who tried to investigate it? And what will happen to the next person who dares to enter the last house on the street? The conclusion of the story is open-ended, and that is what makes it so scary. It leaves the reader wondering what might happen if they were to go into the house themselves.